Hi, my name's Katie, and I am here to walk you through the 7 steps as we described in an earlier video. These 7 steps are for when you are hiring at your small business or your growing business, and there's a few things that we want to make sure that you cover. So, step 1 is going to be creating a job description. Creating a job description should always be your first step when you're hiring at a small business. A job description is a tool that uses plain language to describe the tasks, duties, functions, and requirements of a position. It's necessary because one of the most important reasons is you want to make sure that you're hiring the right person. The biggest tip here is to be sure that you're creating a job description for the role and not for the person currently in that role. That might seem like common sense, but if your mom is the accountant but doesn't have a master's degree in accounting and that's what the hiring manager is looking for, then the job description must state that as a requirement. Number 2, for a job description, it's really vital to be using it as a tool for the employee to meet expectations. It's important to have that job description updated before you hire the employee and before you possibly need to discipline or coach that employee. So make sure you have it in place prior. Lastly, a well-crafted job description will help you write your job advertisement. You want to clearly state what the employee will be doing on a regular basis. Transparency is going to be key for good hiring results. You don't want an applicant to be completely confused when they show up for their interview or on their first day. Also, if you have education and experience requirements clearly listed on your job description, you can easily input those and weed out options on certain websites like LinkedIn and Facebook. This will cut down on the number of unqualified applicants that you hear from when you're hiring at your company. Post your role. After creating and reviewing your job description, post the position. There are many websites out there that we like to use: LinkedIn, Monster, ZipRecruiter, Facebook. Use 1 or 2 of these and post it on your own website and social media as well. You're going to want to get the word out as much as possible to as many people as you can. We recommend using sometimes a staffing agency to post positions as well. Staffing agencies are a great way to outsource, and they're hiring experts, so they are great with working with you hand in hand to make sure that you get the right candidate. The second step in this series is reviewing the applications of anybody that applies. So application review is exactly what it says. It's reviewing each application or resume once it's received to determine whether the candidate possesses the proper knowledge, skills, and abilities for the position. Typically, I separate candidates into 2 piles. One pile will be the ones that I will phone screen, and one pile will be ones that just don't look like a good fit. Move through those applicants pretty quickly. Any position posted will get a lot of unqualified candidates and applicants. Don't waste your time on those. Definitely don't be discouraged about the number of unqualified applicants that come through. It's very normal. Spend a bit more time carefully reviewing the job applicants that look like they could be a good fit. Some things to look for: do they have a solid work history? Do they have a string of jobs for less than a year? Does their job history show progression over a few years? Have they gained responsibility? These are all really important things. Does the applicant have the skills or work history that you're looking for? Is the applicant asking for way more than the pay range? These are all things that you need to consider when you're reviewing applications. Lastly, some companies use ATS, applicant tracking systems, to help them with this process. ATS systems can save you time and help you organize and evaluate your applicants. Either way, sort your applicants into a select few that you want to move into the next step in the hiring process, which is the phone interview. Step 3 of 7 of the interview process is pre-screening the candidates. This is following the job description creation and initial application review. Typically, I pre-screen by just a simple phone interview. This step is another good way to weed out the applicant pool and saves you a lot of time in the long run. Why call an employee in for an interview when you can easily decide on the phone if they're a good fit or not? Before the phone interview, I create a list of pre-screening questions with the hiring manager. The purpose of the pre-screen is to determine whether or not this candidate actually is a possibility and to be sure that they have the minimum requirements as described in the job description. Some of the questions I like to ask are you comfortable with the hours listed on the advertisement, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday? How many years of experience do you have working in this field? If you're thinking these questions should have been answered by way of the person initially applying for the job, you would be correct. In all of my years of hiring, trust me, I've seen it all. People frequently apply for jobs that they are not qualified for. They apply for jobs without reading the whole job ad. I also like to ask what interests you about this position. This question is a great way to get some insight into what the applicant is looking for, what motivates them, what they even think the position is. That's important. I always ask, why are you looking to leave your current job? There are many okay answers to this question these days. People are leaving companies for growth and for other reasons. However, the one thing I would watch out for is an applicant who does not have a good answer to this question, someone who speaks negatively about past employers, it's not good, and whose answer would just generally be otherwise problematic. Lastly, I like to review and make sure that they have the minimum qualifications that I've set in the job description, for example. I make a list or bullet points of necessary skills and make sure that the applicant has them. At the end of the call, I am sure to thank them for their time. I let them know that I will reach out to them if they make it to the next step. Don't make any promises of an in-person interview or even a callback. Again, this is huge. Do not make any promises. This is going to save you a lot of time and confusion on the part of your applicants. This way, you only need to call candidates back who are your top candidates. You don't want to have to call every candidate back and say, "Hi, I'm just calling to tell you that we're not interested in you. Okay, have a good day." It's much easier to let them know that they will hear from you if you are moving them into the next round. Also, tell them to feel free to follow up with you if they have not heard within a few weeks. It lifts the burden off of you and can be handled simply in the future if the position has been filled. Interviews are next. They're fun. An interview is a meeting between the job seeker and the employer. The purpose of this interview is to evaluate whether the candidate has the right qualifications for the job. It is super important to be sure the managers who are interviewing have been trained on the legalities of an interview. This is huge. There are certain questions that are legally not permitted to be asked. Some questions that cannot be asked, for example, would be the age of the candidate or if they are planning on having kids in the near future. Other illegal interview topics are anything related to religion, pregnancy, citizenship, disability status, any of those things. Interviews can be a bit tricky for inexperienced hiring managers, so be sure to do your homework ahead of time. The DOL has a list online of some tips, and I can give you a few now. I like to write out my questions before starting the interview process. There's a couple of reasons for that. One of them is so I am sure that I ask all of the candidates the same questions for the most part. You also have a place to jot down notes for your interview. Be careful you're not writing anything discriminatory in your notes. They could potentially be discoverable if there ever is a lawsuit. Some of my favorite interview questions that I ask are behavioral questions. So these questions review and require the candidate to share specific examples and situations where they've had to use certain skills. These questions can be super eliminating. They're a little more in-depth. You can start with, tell me about a time that you had a conflict with your manager. How did you handle that? Or tell me about a time that you made a mistake. How did you handle that? How did you fix it? Some others could be, tell me about a time where you showed initiative, or tell me about a time when you set and achieved a goal in the workplace. These questions are great. They help get past a surface level, and they really help you see if a candidate might be a good fit for your team. Another tip is to be very, very clear about what the role is during the interview. You want to let them know exactly what they will be doing, a summary at least, so there are no surprises. I know you may feel a tendency to make the job appear better than it is, but this will definitely only hurt you in the long run. Candidates should be clear on what the role is so they can excuse themselves if it isn't a good fit. Data entry is data entry. My last piece of interview advice would be to listen more than you speak, which is tricky. This can be tricky since as the owner or the hiring manager, typically you'd be the one leading the interview, but it is super important. I've seen many hiring managers spend most of the interview talking rather than listening. If this happens, you aren't able to get as good of a feel for the candidate. You want to put them on a spot just a little bit and give them a chance to fully answer the questions that you're asking. Once the interviews have been completed, candidates will be selected on the basis of the results of those interviews. Step 5 of 7 is choosing the candidate. This is the fun part. The next step is choosing your candidate. As exciting as this step is, it is definitely stressful. Hiring is one of the most stressful and high-stakes tasks that any small business has to face. Forbes estimates that the cost of a bad hire is about 30% of the employee's first year earnings. That's a lot. Basically, if you want to hire somebody, you need to take your time, make an informed choice. I've seen many hiring managers rush through this process and choose the wrong candidate, and the results are a pain, and it takes a lot of time to fix it versus just doing it right the first time. Choosing a candidate is done by comparing the candidate's qualifications to a predetermined list of qualifications. It's important that the candidate does meet the minimum requirements as described in the job description that you updated. You can immediately cross people off the list who do not meet those minimum requirements. Try to reevaluate your remaining candidates. Be as fair as you can. Also, listen to your gut. Did you get an immediate feeling of who would be the best candidate? Another tip is to potentially ask advice from someone that you trust who is not in the interview with you. Sometimes I do group or panel interviews, so there's a few managers to weigh in afterward. Even if you do the interview solo, you could still use this strategy. Sit down with another high-level manager, someone you trust, and have them look over the resumes and your interview notes. They could probably give you some good feedback. Another opinion from somebody that you trust is definitely helpful. Step 6 of 7 is performing backgrounds and reference checks. This is huge. Performing background and reference checks should never be skipped in the hiring process. I personally have seen disastrous effects of not background screening or reference checking a new employee. For example, hiring someone who has been convicted of embezzlement to manage your accounting department is probably not the best idea and not something you would do if you knew about that background. In addition to that, you may be liable for negligent hiring if you hire someone who could have potentially harmed an employee or a client. So, as defined on SHRM, which is the Society of Human Resources, under the doctrine of negligent hiring, an employer is liable for the harm its employees inflict on third parties when the employer knew or should have known of the employee's potential risk to cause harm, or if the risk would have been discovered by a reasonable investigation, like a standard background check. In other words, negligent hiring is a claim made by an injured party against an employer based on the theory that the employer knew or should have known about the employee's background, which, if known, could indicate a dangerous or an untrustworthy person. Even if you choose as a business owner not to do a full background check, we still recommend doing a lower level background check that at least covers violent offenses, issues like that. This is an easy way to avoid a negligent hiring claim and, most importantly, to keep your current employees and your business safe. Along with background screens, I do recommend basic background and reference checks as well. It's important to call on employees' references, make sure they're professional references, to verify that their resume is accurate, for one, and to get additional information that interviews might miss. As much good information a reference check could provide, it's even more important for sometimes the negative information that you might hear. So if you find out through a reference check that a candidate lied about his job, for example, or was a bad performer, you would probably want to pass on hiring them or at least think twice. The bottom line is background check your employees. I know that running background checks and reference checks are not the most exciting. They might sound like a pain and they take time, but do not skip them. There are many companies who can help you with this service for a small fee. Cybhr does this all the time for our clients. Step 7 of 7 when hiring an employee at a small business is the offer letter. An offer letter is very important in order to clearly draw out what you, the business owner, is offering to the new hire. Verbal agreements on the rate of pay or position title will only go so far. You do not want to hire an employee and then realize that they heard you tell them that you would pay them $30 an hour when you said $13 an hour. An offer letter can clearly go over benefits, PTO, moving allowance. I always have the employees sign and date their offer letter, and I keep it in their file. There are many potential issues in offer letters. For example, make sure to state the salary in bi-weekly terms and any time off in hourly increments. Be sure that you as the business owner do not contractually obligate yourself in any way. When possible, it is definitely advised that you have a certified HR professional review the offer letter prior to sending it out. Be sure to like us and subscribe on YouTube for HR updates and help your small business succeed.